Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be waiting just a few minutes before we start. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I see more people have rolled in. Before we start, I'm going to be promoting everybody from attendee to panelist. If you'd like to turn on your camera, turn on your mics during the Q&A portion, please accept my invitation. If you'd like to be promoted and I somehow miss your invitation, just raise your virtual hand and I'll go back and promote you. Thank you very much. Nahak, I think we can get the ball rolling and I'll keep promoting people as they join.
Sure, Daphne. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the ISGAP Holocaust and Literature Seminar Series. For today's session, we have with us Bernice Lerner, joining us, who will be speaking on vital considerations in teaching Holocaust literature. She writes about the Holocaust and on virtue ethics. Bernice is the author of All the Horrors of War, A Jewish Girl, a British Doctor, and The Liberation of Bergen, Belsen, The Triumph of Wounded Souls, 7 Holocaust Survivors' Lives, and a co-author of Happiness and Virtue, Beyond East and West, Toward a New Global Responsibility. Before and after, she served as director of Boston University's Center for Character and Social Responsibility, where she now is working as a senior scholar. Bernice worked at Hebrew College, most recently as Dean of Adult Learning. She has more than 25 years of experience in the field of adult education. It has been her great privilege to create innovative programs, lead productive teams, and work with outstanding faculty in the realms of philosophy, education, and Jewish studies. Bernice, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Mihak. Thank you to ISGAP, and thank you to everyone who's here today. It's my honor to speak with you. I'm going to be referring quite a bit to October 7th because it's so fresh in our minds. But the topic of my talk is vital considerations in teaching Holocaust literature. This is not just for teachers. This is really for anyone who wants to engage with Holocaust literature. So 3 months have passed since October 7th, the day on which Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists kidnapped 240 and murdered 1,200 men, women, and children, perpetrating obscene and barbaric acts in kibbutzim and military bases in southern Israel and at the Tribe of Nova Music Festival, just a few kilometers from the Gaza border. With the passage of time, this attack and its aftershocks, at the moment still raw, will move into the annals of history. This is what has happened with the innumerable acts of violence and barbarity that occurred during the Holocaust. 2 of my great aunts and 2 of my great uncles and their 5 small children were gunned down in the Maelstrom's first 5-figure massacre. While I carry the memory of their slaughter and my survivor parents' experiences, for many, Hitler's scourge seems distant. For young people, it can seem as ancient as the story of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt. According to a massive ADL survey, only 54% of respondents have even ever heard of the Holocaust. An Economist YouGov poll showed that 1/5 of 18 to 29-year-olds either strongly agree or tend to agree that the Holocaust is a myth. And yet, there is no greater body of literature on any other subject, save perhaps the Civil War. Since 1945, we've seen the publication of thousands of Holocaust-related works, including memoirs, biographies, novels, diaries, anthologies, and scholarly writings. We have our pick of what to read. Many educational organizations provide reading lists. I will not here be recommending books. I will suggest, however, that it is vital to select and read Holocaust literature with humility, empathy, curiosity, and integrity. First, humility. One of the shoddiest sentiments I have ever heard is, I know all about the Holocaust. Not even the greatest scholar can possibly know all about the colossal, complex genocide. Moreover, certain of its horrors are inconceivable. One had to have been there. One had to have seen and heard and smelled the abomination and felt the terror. We ought to enter Holocaust literature humbly, realizing that words on a page cannot capture the depths of evil and human suffering. In If This Is a Man, or Survival in Auschwitz, chemist and author Primo Levi tells of Auschwitz III, Buna Monowitz, where he was imprisoned following his arrest by Italian fascists in late 1943. Recalling the misery, dehumanization, and hard labor, he explains the need for a new vocabulary. Just as our hunger is not that feeling of missing a meal, so our way of being cold has need of a new word. We say hunger, we say tiredness, fear, pain, we say winter, and they are different things. They are free words, created and used by free men who live in comfort and suffering in their homes. If the lagers had lasted longer, a new harsh language would have been born, and only this language could express what it means to toil the whole day in the wind, with the temperature below freezing, wearing only a shirt, underpants, cloth jacket, and trousers, and in one's body nothing but weakness, hunger, and knowledge of the end drawing nearer. Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel has also expressed in various ways the insufficiency of language. The author of a PBS article titled Story in Silence quotes Wiesel, "The Holocaust cannot be described. It cannot be communicated. It is unexplainable." In 1941, early in the Holocaust, Ilya Selvinsky, a Jewish poet who served as a military reporter and political officer in the Red Army, urged a new poetics for writing about the murder of the Jews. In a poem titled I Saw It, he wrote, "No language has been devised for this unbearable torment." Jean Amery, a Belgian resistor who was captured and tortured by the Gestapo at Fort Bringdonk before being sent to Auschwitz, authored At the Mind's Limits. In this searing account of his experiences, he wrote, "Only those who have lived through a fate like mine, and no one else, can refer their lives to the years 1933 to 1945. Only we, the sacrificed, are able to spiritually relive the catastrophic event as it was, or fully picture it as it could be again. Let others not be prevented from empathizing. Let them contemplate a fate that yesterday could have been and tomorrow can be theirs. Their intellectual efforts will meet with our respect, but it will be a skeptical one, and in conversation with them, we will soon grow silent and say to ourselves, 'Go ahead, good people, trouble your heads as much as you want. You still sound like a blind man talking about color.'" Amory's words haunt my efforts to convey Holocaust survivors' experiences. I am ever aware of my blindness, but I know too that the unbridgeable chasm between what we can imagine and the ineffable does not mean that we should not keep trying to listen, to read, and to tell. A qualification. We can imagine trauma and suffering that are not at the far end of the extreme. We can, for example, picture the situation endured by some Onderduikers, the imperiled 50,000 underwater divers hiding in Holland as their fellow Jews were sent to Westerbork and from there to Sobibor or Auschwitz. We can imagine having to live in relatively civilized, albeit cramped quarters, having to make small amounts of substandard food last, and having to keep quiet for hours on end. We may not fathom problems such as what to do with the body of a person who dies while in hiding, but we can envision having to rely on a neighbor or friend or stranger for help. Therein lies the appeal of Anne Frank's diary, one of the best-selling books of all time. But when it comes to Anne Frank's end, we must admit that we cannot imagine it. Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen epitomize evil beyond the nth degree. Having led the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, Brigadier Glenn Hughes served as first witness at the Belsen trial. He tried to describe what the British Second Army found upon entering the camp. "You had to have been there," he said. Even as he showed film footage, he knew that without actually smelling the fetid huts filled with starved and sick inmates, and seeing the piles of corpses and thousands of staggering Muslim, one cannot fathom the ravaged state of the victims and what their saviors were up against. A digression with regard to today's tragedy. Recorded phone calls and text messages, videotaped movements, some caught by the terrorists' own GoPro body cams, reveal what unfolded in real time on October 7th. Still, from the comfort of our homes, our imagination takes us only so far. In some accounts given by survivors and first responders, we hear the words, "I can't describe it. It was that horrible." There are no words. And so we register what we can of the havoc of those torturous hours. With humility and sincerity, we receive and shudder at whatever witnesses to the savagery share. And now a second consideration, empathy. Empathy stretches our capacity to imagine. It involves learning about individuals caught in Hitler's murderous web. Their developmental stage matters. Their relationships matter. Their strengths, weaknesses, and fears, their habits and dispositions matter. The more the whole person emerges, the closer we may come to seeing situations from his or her point of view. To illustrate, I've lifted one story briefly. Here are a few sentences about one among the millions. Through observations and ruminations in her wartime diary, published in 1999 as "And Yet I Am Here," Halina Nelkin, a feisty Polish teenager from a prosperous, assimilated Krakow family, showed herself to be well-educated and urbane, romantic and hopeful. After Germany invaded in 1939, she and her family were forced to give up the material comforts they had long enjoyed. Halina witnessed her father's heart-rending demise, was forced to clean streets, and found her world contract as she moved from the ghetto to the Plaszow labor camp to Auschwitz. Halina railed against the deplorable conditions, the cruel punishments and humiliations to which the Jews were subjected, the liquidation at the ghetto. At times, spoiled Halina whined. Her mother, who was with her for much of her internment, consoled her, chided her, encouraged her. Halina rallied, helping children in her charge, daring to approach guards for favors. Changing the lyrics of popular Polish and German tunes to words of resistance, she sang them on the way to work sites. She recited poems in the evenings in overcrowded, filthy barracks. She inspired many fellow sufferers. Tall, light-haired, and blue-eyed Halina resisted in other ways. In serving Nazi pilots coffee, she spat into their cups, giving them a dollop of whipped cream. But she could not act when it might have made the greatest difference in her fate. Contemplating escape after being transferred to a new camp, she was held back by a personal encounter with a kind inmate. The interaction meant that she would not be disappearing from an anonymous mass. Her daring would result in collective punishment, potentially harming the girl she met. To the extent readers of Halina's diary empathize with the resourceful, upright teenager, they might consider what they might do in similar circumstances. Readers might know where Helena exhibits wisdom, temperance, and courage, and when such virtues are hard or impossible for her to display. But a sketch of an individual can draw us in. Our minds and hearts are wired for story, for characters that make us feel. More than numbers, names abet our understanding. In the introduction to his biography of Arthur Koestler, the late Holocaust scholar David Cesarani wrote, "One man's experiences may serve as a point of entry into one of the most appalling human tragedies of this last century." Put another way, historian Leslie Bloom argued, it always comes back to the human story. It's relentlessly important to bring events down to human lives. If you can bring a story down to a handful of people who are experiencing a globe or country rocking event, then there's a better chance your readers will comprehend the enormity of the event. Ironically, the more granular and human focused the account, the greater the comprehension. Journalists, filmmakers, writers, anyone engaged in storytelling knows the power of lifting a character or characters to the fore. In recent accounts of those taken hostage by Hamas, seeing faces and having names and stories put to these faces elicits empathy. The anguish felt by family of hostages is attended by a kind of collective heartbreak felt by decent people the world over. Hearing about individual soldiers or about innocent children who have been maimed or killed moves us, possibly to tears, possibly to beneficent action. Personal accounts may also inspire us to want to learn more about lives that were so tragically upended, about political or historical factors that led to this moment in time. Narrative empathy can lead to curiosity. So we talked about humility, empathy, and now curiosity. Curiosity. What do we wish to learn about ways in which globe-rocking events affected particular individuals or groups? About Holocaust history. Perhaps an author will provide a timeline and maps in graphic or narrative form. The author might also refer to wartime developments that bore on characters' fates. And of course, the reader's curiosity may guide his or her own research. And it's so important for teachers to give the background to stories. The Holocaust was comprised of hundreds of thousands of actions occurring in different ways, in different places, at different times. What happened in the fall of 1941 in the Rumbuli forest near Riga, Latvia, in Babi Yar near Kiev, and in hundreds of other locations where Jews were gunned down en masse, differed from the bitter, long-term incarceration of Jews in ghettos in Poland, each of which had its own appalling trajectory. And then there were the thousands of camps where Jewish inmates were forced to perform labor for the German war machine, where SS officers and Nazi functionaries worked countless prisoners to death. And most notorious, the 6 death camps, which operated according to a master plan, but varied in their layouts, staffing, procedures, and duration. We cannot know all of the many dimensions of the Holocaust. Literature narrows the field, enabling us to gain knowledge of measures affecting particular individuals or groups in Germany, France, Poland, Greece, or other Nazi-occupied countries. For example, a story might unfold against the background of what happened in Hungary. We may learn why this country, allied with the Axis powers, resisted German occupation until it did not, and its government, cooperating with Adolf Eichmann and his minions, deported 430,000 Jews from its provinces, the last unmolested mass of European Jewry, to Auschwitz-Birkenau. By mid-May 1944, the death camp's gas chambers and crematoria had been readied for the rapid annihilation of this forlorn, trapped population. Curiosity. We may want to explore ways in which the war, battles won and lost, political machinations successful or thwarted, influenced the course of the Holocaust. For example, in January 1945, more than 6 months after the Allied landing on the beaches of Normandy, and with Russia closing in on Germany from the east, the Nazis forced roughly 750,000 remaining inmates who had managed to evade the gas chambers and who had endured slave labor to march deep into Germany away from prospective liberators. In frigid temperatures without adequate clothing or food, an estimated 2/3 of these prisoners died on what came to be called death marches. Wehrmacht guards shot those who could not keep up, yet another method of ridding Europe of its Jews. While deepening our knowledge of globe-rocking events, our curiosity can also help us build our store of stories, stories we may refer back to at times of travail in our own lives and in the world. What we learn about World War II bears on current events. Some leaders, for example, hoping that Gaza will one day become peaceful and prosperous, are studying ways in which post-war Germany and Japan purged their fascistic ideologies. Now, what if our curiosity is satisfied by misleading texts, by authors who have taken liberties with truth, who in their desire to spin a dramatic yarn, to reach a wide readership, choose invention over accuracy? This leads to a fourth vital consideration with regard to Holocaust literature. So in addition to humility, empathy, curiosity, we have integrity. We ought to know when and by whom a story was written, and if fictionalized, for what purpose. There are arguments for fiction. Novels serve to introduce subjects, perhaps spurring readers to want to learn more. Fictional characters can inspire readers. Their choices may raise questions about morality and humanity, stimulating worthwhile discussion. Imagined scenes thick with description can help us envision foreign worlds. And in distilling or conflating events, the fiction writer simplifies the complicated. When fiction is based on true events, it promises to teach certain facts. But the degree to which such stories can be relied upon for historical accuracy varies. How deeply did the author research the subject? How can those of us who are not scholars evaluate whether or not we are getting a true picture? When it comes to Holocaust literature, I would argue that integrity is critical. Consider the following. In Auschwitz and elsewhere, imprisoned Jews etched their names into the walls of barracks. They wanted their existence on earth, the truth of their lives and deaths, to be remembered. How would they want their stories told? Do fictionalized accounts risk trivializing or distorting the reality? And why manufacture Holocaust stories when what actually occurred is terrible or poignant enough, when truth is stranger than fiction? I spoke about Helena's book. Excuse me. At the end of 1941, Helena Nelken was ordered to report to Krakow's former Geographical Institute for an anthropological examination. During a naked exam, a red-faced Gestapo doctor subjected her to nauseating abuse. This is the truth. In the fall of 1944, when the SS were trying to cover up their crimes, Helena was forced to haul wood for pyres for the burning of 9,000 corpses in 11 mass graves. She would never forget the revolting smell, or that 12 wagons of ashes left the camp. This is the truth. In December of 1944, Helena was selected to work at an office in Auschwitz. A man who delivered daily reports gave her a tiny notebook bound in red leather. She resumed her writing and hid the notebook in her shoe. This is the truth, and it's strange. It's unbelievable. The following month, she witnessed the hangings of 4 girls who had worked in the Union munitions factory, who took part in the plot to blow up Birkenau crematoria the previous October. This is the truth. She was an eyewitness to this historical, horrible event. Truly, an author cannot and should not make up or embellish such stories. Excuse me. An obligation to historical accuracy does not necessarily render nonfiction writers less capable than fiction writers of crafting readable stories, or of portraying characters who faced adversity in admirable or ignoble or nuanced ways. Finally, might fiction provide fodder for Holocaust deniers? It scarcely takes distance from an event to distort its reality. Despite the abundance of evidence, we have already seen denial of the October 7th massacre. Jordan's Queen Rania al-Abdullah doubted the atrocities. Several Palestinian Authority ministers have accused Israel of perpetrating murders and rapes against their own people. And then we have the explosion of lies on social and in mainstream media, in protests, even in classrooms. Where, we might ask, is the integrity of spokespersons and reporters? I will concede that sometimes good comes out of a work of Holocaust fiction. The greatest example, to my mind, is the USC Shoah Foundation Visual History Archive. In March of 1994, after accepting an Academy Award for Best Picture for Schindler's List, based on Thomas Keneally's historical novel, Steven Spielberg launched an ambitious project. Knowing that survivors' stories would soon be lost to history, he captured on video as many of their testimonies as possible. Among the roughly 350,000 survivors then alive in 1994, that number is very small now. Most had been young adults during the war. They were now seniors. It would be a race against time. One survivor, a child who had hid with her family in a crowded farmhouse in the hills of Italy, said, "We come forward because we are aware of our mortality and how important it is to share what happened." The integrity of Steven Spielberg's project, which captured 52,000 Holocaust survivor testimonies, is evident in its protocols and in its careful efforts to collect, document, and preserve the truth. Visual history archive teams have recently traveled to Israel to videotape survivors of the Hamas-led terror attack on October 7th. The more than 250 testimonies collected to date will become part of the Foundation's Countering Anti-Semitism through Testimony collection. Holocaust literature ought to serve the same goals as this noble project, to ensure that research, education, and commemoration can reach current and future generations so that they understand what happens when anti-Semitism goes unchecked. Educators would also do well to encourage students to approach their reading with humility and empathy for relatable protagonists and curiosity about the contexts those protagonists navigated, and to put before students books that hold integrity, that tell the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. It was amazing. And I like the way how you weaved all the vital considerations one into another. So we do have a comment by Professor Delia Offer. And according to her, she says, "I do not think that we should talk about the terrible terrorist attack of Hamas on October 7th as a Holocaust. It is horrendous, it is sheer cruelty. However, it's not Holocaust. Israelis have a government and a capacity of a strong state and army which failed. It's far away from the helplessness of Jews during the Holocaust." So, any further comments about that, Bernice?
I agree 100%. I'm not comparing it to the Holocaust. I agree. I agree with that. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing.
All right. And then we have a question from Joseph. And the question is, do you believe that the tearing down of October 7th hostage posters was primarily motivated by trying to prevent empathy for the hostages?
Oh, I think maybe there was a lot of reasons that motivated that, but maybe, I mean, it doesn't fit. The fact that there were hostages taken doesn't fit a certain narrative of Israel and the Jewish people, who in this certain world that we're living in, according to some people, maybe that who see the world as oppressors and oppressed, it just it doesn't jive with their understanding of who Israel is. And yeah, so there's a lot of reasons, and I think I have to believe that there was some kind of call for tearing down these posters. There was some kind of organization that was encouraging this and people, making them feel virtuous doing this egregious act.
Right. Next, we have Charles. Please go ahead and ask your question.
First of all, I want to thank you for your talk. I enjoyed it very much. I am a child of survivors, and I actually have an education in Holocaust literature as well from JTS. But I spent last week at the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, and it was almost empty, which is very troubling to me. And I think your work needs some form of elevation. How do we elevate the narrative in a manner that gets more traction with Jews as well as non-Jews to embrace the current status of anti-Semitism in the universities, in government, and in the media? How do you elevate this narrative now, when this is now becoming very visible? It's been going on for a long time, but it's growing in an unboundaried manner, man. I really love your thoughts, please.
This is a very big question. Thank you for asking it. It's, you know, what I notice happening among Holocaust organizations, Holocaust education organizations, is they are breaking their heads about this. They're asking these questions. Why, when it's mandated in like something like 24 states, like why is, and it should be in more, why isn't it doing its job more? Why is there this unmasking of anti-Semites and anti-Jewish and anti-Israel feeling now? What the shock of October 7th and the aftermath of October 7th, what's happening is jarring. And it is the job of education, and it has to happen in schools everywhere. And, you know, how do you turn souls? Like all of the polls, I just cited 2 polls in my talk, but all of these polls are showing that young people are not really aware. This isn't part of their consciousness. They don't really understand, and they're not taken in, they're not grabbed by stories. That's why, and there is so much literature out there, and occasionally there are good films out there. So how do you turn students' souls, and how does it happen in the classroom? And this is really a question for educators and for educators of educators. How are we teaching this, and how are we trying to elevate these stories? And I know that I'm not an expert in this. I know that there's a debate about universalizing the Holocaust, comparing it, you know, to other genocides, of which is also very different. And but I really think it's through the power of story. It's really through the power of individual stories, and it's really trying to lift these characters into bold relief and helping people to empathize. And it's the job of all of us who write and who teach to try our best to get word out.
Teaching may not be enough. You know, it's interesting. teaching may not be enough when you see the 3 college presidents that we all watched, as you probably watched as well, in total disgust of their testimony. And it may be more than just education. It may require other action. It may require totally different actions on the Jewish community, because the museums, the literature, the schools, it's not working. It's not working. It's just not working. I'm just telling you, it's not working.
It's not working. And when I saw the college presidents, when I listened to them, I thought they are probably experts in their fields and in their realms. But this is a subject about which I think they might be, they might not know very much, or they might not have had very much exposure, because, as someone said, in preparing for the congressional hearings, they should have really studied up, not lawyered up, but studied up, learned the material, learned the background, learned the history. I don't have answers. I mean,
Okay, I'm sorry to ask the question. I apologize.
No, it's a great question. It's haunting me.
It's haunting me too. That's the truth.
Haunting me. I mean, I live right near Harvard, and when I walk through Harvard Yard and I hear the pro-Palestinian protests, of course we feel for innocent people the world over, but I know that these kids do not know. I don't know what they know, if anything, about the Holocaust.
I speak a fluent Yiddish. I'm friendly with Ruth Weiss, who lives now in New York, and we talk all the time. And what's crazy is we're seeing this DEI stuff metastasize into an anti-Jewish narrative.
Well,
it's a terrible thing going on.
But Hamas, what Hamas did is beyond words horrible. But what they also did unintentionally was they awakened the world to this DEI stuff, and they really shone a light on it. And I just keep thinking, the government has to, the fact that we had this congressional hearing, the fact that these college presidents were called out, the fact that the alumni and donors to these universities are paying attention to what's happening on the campus, the fact that this may throw there's a big rift in the country now. There's a big between DEI and get rid of DEI, and the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action is one sort of step in a certain direction. So I think that it's coming out more and more, and a lot of attention is being paid to it in the news. And that's a good thing, because too many years we went by with just ignoring or just not understanding the underpinnings of this oppressor categories, and white, and what privilege means, and what being Jewish means. And I think all these things are now, there's a spotlight on them. Hamas did this. So there's a spotlight on these things now. And I think we have to have hope that, smart people are asking good questions, and debates are going to go on, but voices will be heard and not canceled, for instance. So
thanks.
I think we are at this turning point. But I have to say, my mom died. She's a survivor, and she died last year. And I'm glad she isn't here to witness some of these things.
We do have a question from Lawrence, who asks that, is it possible to have a bibliography of the books that you talked about, Bernice?
A bibliography of the books I spoke of? I mentioned very few, but of course I'll be happy to send you a list, Miha.
I'd like to see them, please.
Sure.
I'm sorry?
I can
I'd
share
like
it
to have them as well, please.
Miha will share, right?
We do have all your email IDs, so I'm going to share it further. And dovetailing on her comment, Professor Daly-Offer asks a question that she agrees with your important categories that you talked about, but then she's asking that, why do you think that the Shoah Foundation should document the event of October 7th?
I didn't have feelings about that really in particular either way, but when I learned that they were doing it, because I think people were asking survivors, people were people are looking to celebrities, to people who have voices to see what they're going to do. And I think this was Steven Spielberg's answer to this tragedy. And I think that because there will be people who will deny this, there's already people who deny that it happened. It's good to capture the video, the eyewitness testimonies. And I think I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful. A lot of my research, I'm working on another book now, and I am deep in Holocaust survivor testimonies. And you really, you find out a lot. And thank God, I'm so grateful that Steven Spielberg did that we have these testimonies.
Right. Next up, we have Professor Subarno Chatterjee. Please go ahead and ask your question, Professor.
Yeah, thank you, Mayank, and thank you, Professor Lerner, for your talk. I just wanted to go back to your talk. Actually, this whole idea of the insufficiency of language. This is something that, of course, as you know, all Holocaust survivors who have written about it, and that have the impossibility of trying to express what they have been through, and yet the necessity of writing. So that Primo Levi, for instance, as you know, spends a large part of his life after Auschwitz writing about the Holocaust. So it's not as if the need to create a new language. So Paul Celan and Jean Améry, whom you cited. So I think it's not really a question, but would you think that we need to find, to go back to the earlier question about education, because I'm also involved in projects with the Holocaust Museum about education for secondary school students. Do you think we need a different kind of language to talk to people about the Holocaust?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, it's inventing. I think that we have to approach the subject with humility, and we have to let students know that we're entering this world that none of us can really understand. I've tried my whole life to picture what things were like for my relatives, from my grandparents. And it's really hard to get to that place. So we just have to caution students, say there's no real words. Sometimes things are so bad that we don't have the vocabulary to express it, but we still have to try. And there's still writers. So I think we don't have the language, and we can't get the language. We just can't. It's just this unbridgeable chasm, but I think that we have to let people know that. Just put it out there and say that. And I know I just gave you some quotes from people who've written about it, but any survivor, like you said, any survivor you talk to, like one of my aunts, she'll talk about, she says, I can't even believe it myself, what I saw and that I was there. Even people going through it. I mean, it was, people coped in all kinds of ways. I mean, in Bergen, Belsen, death was so ubiquitous. It was everywhere. And it's so hard to imagine the scene. And I've seen actual British Army film footage because it was probably the most documented liberation. And still, as my mother would say, she would say, no film, because after the war they showed some clips. She said no film, nothing could show it. And you hear the same from the people who were the first responders, the liberators. And one of my aunts, when her brother died, she told her daughter she wanted to go into the room where her brother lay dead. And she said to her daughter, I want to see. She said, I don't know what, I've never seen a dead person. And here was someone who survived Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz, but there was some kind of mechanism where she blocked, like, she said, oh, those weren't real. So even people in it couldn't make sense of what they were witnessing, some of them. So I don't think it's up to us to invent a new vocabulary. It's up to us to approach the literature with humility and to know that there are things we won't get, but we have to try.
Thank you, Bernice. Now, Christoph, just go ahead and ask a question.
Okay, I unmuted myself. I have to explain a little bit, because otherwise you don't understand. I'm German and I'm Catholic, but with Jewish roots from my past, my grandparents, etc. And I lived more than 30 years abroad. Okay, now I live since more than 28 years in Greece. Okay, Athens. And I have to agree with Charles, absolutely. Education is useless, forget it. I just had over Christmas and New Year family discussions that drove me bananas. Like my daughter is, her boyfriend is from Israel, but he's Arab Christian, okay? So there's one dimension. Then my nephew is involved with a Palestinian, his girlfriend, that lives in a compound in Saudi Arabia, who has basically no idea really what's going on in Gaza and God knows what, but who basically brainwashed my nephew. And you cannot imagine what I had to listen to, about settler colonialism and God knows what else. The young generation, they don't care about education. They just want to listen to what, let's say, the underdog is. They feel, I'm teaching, I'm a professor, right, of history. So I'm teaching these young people. And they side with the so-called underdog, yeah? And these are the Palestinians by definition, yeah? So supposedly, yeah? And you can say whatever you want. You can talk yourself, God knows what. It's not going to go anywhere. They don't listen to you. And they just believe. Even BBC, New York Times, and all that believe all this rubbish. That remember the attack on this hospital in Gaza, that was immediately blamed on Israel, which was, to my things. By definition, not an IDF thing, by definition not. But anyway, they believe it immediately. Even decent media, like BBC and New York Times, etc., they believe immediately. Why? The question is why, And this seems to be, to me, a matter of this generation of people nowadays that just believe any rubbish that is being told, without critically asking, what's the real deal here? What's the logics here, etc., etc. Sorry, Bernice, if I don't have a direct question to you, but I just wanted to say these things about let's say, education and anti-Semitism and all that. And me personally, being German, I never wanted to get involved in Holocaust studies, etc., because I had enough. I was in the generation that was tortured with Holocaust forever, But then living abroad, I was confronted with the Holocaust and being challenged as a German. And then I said, okay, enough. I'm going to get involved in it and I'm going to get things. And that's how I got to ISGAP. Yeah. And I tell you one more thing. Sorry if I'm, let's say, a little bit too long, but I'm organizing since 6 years an ISGAP lecture series on themes of anti-Semitism. And I had many experts from all over the world talking about aspects of anti-Semitism. And the last one was in November, end of November. And when a Polish colleague talked about, let's say, what the Jews, let's say, experienced in Finland in the Second World War. And at the same time, as we had this lecture, we had at the college a demonstration of students pro-Palestine with Palestinian flags, etc., on the college campus. Can you believe this? And then the college talks about, I'm teaching at the American College of Greece, okay, in Athens. And I can't believe it. Normally they talk about, okay, let's say be calm, let's be neutral, let's be God knows what. And then they allow this. I don't understand that. I really don't get it. Sorry.
So I think I feel your pain, and I feel it. I mean, and I know. So there's a continuum, right? There's people that you can't get through to no matter what.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to convince them, you're not going to change their minds. They are sure they're on the side of the right, and it's intractable. You can't have a conversation with them. And then there's people who there might be a little window where you might ask them certain questions, like what does colonialism mean? What does genocide mean? What does an apartheid state mean? You could maybe there's a little window where you could talk to them and get them to think for themselves. What happened, I think, with the congressional hearing, to me, was a very big moment. It was a very big moment, because the other thing is, when you say education is completely useless, sometimes I feel like that too, right? We could all despair, but you never know who you're getting in the classroom. You never know whose soul you'll turn. I mean, my mother spoke to hundreds of school groups, and I'm sure that a lot of kids were not very respectful, or they just were on their iPhones and it just was going over their head. But some kids were so moved. So you're going to, and she did change some kids' outlook on life, and she had a profound impression on them. So there's a whole range of people. What the other thing is, to what extent can we, influence the influencers? These young people are paying attention to a lot of big personalities, and there are some who have a big following who are going to do and say the right thing, and there are some that are not that knowledgeable, that are buy into this whole oppressed narrative. And so you have to know, but maybe there's a way to get through to them. But that's why I say also the government is so important, because at least this is the difference between, to me, today and what my parents went through, and what during the Holocaust. Because when the government turns on you and you have no recourse, there is nothing you can do. But when a government like the United States and other governments know what anti-Semitism looks like and will crack down on certain acts, then at least you have that. And at least I was very impressed by some of the congressmen who were asking questions at the hearing. You probably, if you haven't heard it all, maybe you heard just the most brazen questioning, but there was a lot of intelligent and thoughtful things that the college presidents are influencers. And that's why the resignation of two of them is very significant. We have to get people in leadership positions and in the entertainment industry and to whatever it is that young people are listening to understand. When Jerry Seinfeld made a trip to the kibbutzim in the South, that's huge. So I don't know what the answer is, but you're not going to change everyone, but you have to, if law is on your side, that's very helpful.
All right. Professor Delia Offer wants to speak. Professor, please go ahead.
Hello, I thank you for letting me express my ideas. My name is Dalia, not Delia. And I want to say that I agree very much with the last answer of Bernice Lerner, what she answered. We can never reach everyone. We have to hope to reach some. But we also have to understand that there are kind of ways of thinking in each period of the time. And looking at Israel as colonialism and the Palestinians as the underdog, this is very very much the truth in the mind of these people. And therefore, I think that not only literature, but history is very, very important. I think that the knowledge about the events of Zionism, of the development of the Jewish community, or Yeshuv, it's not exactly a community in the regular sense, of the history of European Jews, not only the Holocaust. The Holocaust had of course a great influence on the support to establish Israel, but without what had happened before, without the foundation that were led and put by early pioneers and Zionists, nothing could have happened and no state could have happened. However, we also have to agree that Israel made a lot of mistakes, different governments, different policies, and we cannot justify everything. To critique Israel is certainly something that should be allowed, but to say Israel does not have the right to exist, and therefore we should take the territory from the sea to the river, and they don't understand, I'm sure that they don't even know which sea and which river when they are talking like this. This is something that we have to consider. And sometimes when we use the Holocaust too much, this will be my last sentence, and it happened in Israel, we compare everything to the Holocaust, or we compare everybody that we don't like or an enemy to the Nazis. We are misusing, we are abusing the Holocaust and the right concept and the right categories. So therefore, let's be careful. We should understand the pains of the Palestinians. We should understand the rights of the Israeli Palestinians and of the Jews, and the right of the Jews to have a state, not because of the Holocaust, because of many other things, and the Holocaust is part of it. So it's complicated, it's difficult, no, miracle solution, but effort and study, I think a lot of history, and the context of the individual story, the individual diary, or the individual literature, when it comes together with a general understanding of the situation, has a great power. Thank you. I just entered, and I thank you for letting me do it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Dalia. So before we wrap up, Bernice, any last comments?
No, I agree with everything that Dalia just said. And I thank you all for coming, and I really appreciate your comments.
Thank you so much for joining us, Bernice. It was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you, everybody. Join us again back on the 22nd of January, where Dr. Ronnie will speak about Holocaust memory in Mauritius. Thank you so much, everybody.